This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is April 24th, 2025.
I'm Scott Lundebaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. We're in the final sprint. We got platforms at the end of the Easter long weekend, well after the debates. Conservatives finally dropped theirs on Tuesday morning, and then they updated it the next day because we'll get into it. And, literally nothing happened here in British Columbia because the legislature's not in session this week. So we're just going to focus on the federal election.
I thought none of the ministers or anything even used the off week to make any announcements. They're really just keeping their head down while the federal election's going on, which, fair enough. Nothing's going to get covered.
There was a couple little ones today. David Eby just announced that the first involuntary treatment beds are open at the Surrey Pretrial Detention Center, but we'll come back to that in a future show, perhaps. Let's talk about the election after I say patreon.com/politicos to support the show. So, advance voting is done. That happened over the long weekend. The good news for lovers of democracy is 7.3 million people voted at those advance polls, 25% more than those who voted in 2021, which was notably a not very exciting election that happened during COVID, or a little bit into, we were still doing lockdowns in that era. So,
yeah, it's something you're seeing us reflect in a lot of provincial elections. It's just the case that more and more people are taking advantage of the advanced vote. So it's not a surprise to see it set records. I think if you were to look at 2019, that would have also been an increase from the year before and would have increased again up to 2021. It's been a pretty steady climb from what I can remember. But it's also kind of interesting because that kind of changed the way the election campaigns have to be run. It used to be that advance vote was pretty rare and you had to provide a good reason why you were going to the advance vote rather than just show up and do it. And, that made everything really set on a single day. That was the focus. But now with, the advance vote a week earlier, more than a week from when it started to when E-Day is, you kind of got to have everything teed off and aiming almost for the first day of advance polls more than the election day itself for what you're going to come out with.
Yeah, you want to have all your supporters identified by that point so that those 4 days you can just be doing GOTV, get out the vote, and getting people to go vote. Because once that's locked in, that's less work to do on election day. More people still will vote on election day, I assume. Otherwise, we'd have a very miserable turnout. A lot of people are trying to assume this will
hint at which way the campaign's going, which maybe, but because we've also just seen this long-term trend, I wouldn't necessarily read a lot into it. And also, the people who are going out to vote right now are probably the decided voters, the people that, got identified if they were contacted by a party weeks ago as a sure thing voter. I was listening to, I want to say it was a podcast with Joe Berto, one of the major pollsters in the country, and he was saying that the hair polling both in Canada and abroad kind of indicates that about 10% of the people who vote end up just making up their minds on election day. And
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, no, it's that. This is
psycho behavior.
I've already voted, but I was weighing it up until the last moment a bit on that because
your very consequential East Van vote.
Yeah, well, this year some of the polling projections actually shows it might be a real contest for once, which would be nice. Kind of sucks having to vote in a completely non-competitive riding. But, the end result is there's still going to be a lot of undecideds. There's going to be people making up their minds for the next week, but you will probably have, in fact, far oversampled the decided voters when it comes to the advance vote.
Yeah, and we'll get into the platforms in a second, but it makes it all the more curious for me that the parties were releasing their platforms during advance voting or even after in the case of the Conservatives. And like, I get the platforms didn't have a lot new in it and all the big things had been announced in the steady stream of policy announcements we discussed over the last few weeks. But it was just, I don't know, it feels disrespectful. And I get maybe it doesn't matter electorally, but it just feels like you're treating the voters as though all they care about is vibes. And then, well, I guess that's what we're going to sow if that's what we're reaping.
Yeah, there's actually been kind of an interesting meta discussion around the platforms and are they actually useful politically on stuff? I kind of view the fact that you should just do it as a matter of course. It should be kind of a basic expectation. But listening to a lot of the strategists and political operatives talking this election, there really does seem to be kind of an emerging consensus that platforms don't sway any votes and just present a larger target area and a chance to get knocked off message. So I'm actually kind of curious if in the following election or the election after that, we won't just see something more akin to just put out a policy announcement today, but don't really bother pulling it all into one big document that has a bunch of other stuff added in beyond the things you did for your announcements of the day.
That's what Doug Ford's done, and it's been fine for him. The vibes
I think in
work for him.
2018, he didn't even really release a platform. He had like 5 commitments, I think, that made up the platform on that, which is, I think, actually can be fine. And if anything, this might have been one of the elections where that was really called for here, because there is just like one big burning question. And if you had a like very tight focused platform on answering the questions around that, like it would have actually made a lot of sense rather than the platforms we got.
I was going to say, none of them did that.
No. Like,
they all did different things.
Yeah, kind of what I was looking for in this was which party had a trash plan to build up Canadian economic resilience, defense and sovereignty, and hard power, basically. The sort of thing that nobody's really thought all that hard about for the last 70 years or so, but is really important to figure out very quickly. None of the parties had a plan for it. None of them even really seemed to bother answering the question on that or considering it something worth doing. All of the responses to the current situation are, let's just do a little more than we'd previously talked about, but there was nothing that would be fundamentally transformative or change how strong and resilient Canada is in a very geopolitically turbulent time.
It's all kind of premised on maybe this will go away soon. Like, even during the debate, you saw it when Mark Carney was asked, what's the biggest threat to Canada? And he's like, it's still China. It's like, there's a case for that. But like, substantively, our neighbor with the largest military in the on the planet is threatening to annex us and is in open economic war with us. We have a lot of diplomatic disputes and foreign interference allegations against China. They're not in a trade war with us as like hot and unpredictable. In terms of like the immediate threat, we just like our politicians are not willing to name the problem, which like in his speeches Carney will talk about we won't become the 50 or we're staying Canada strong is their little slogan, but it does still have that vibe of like, let's try and sidestep it and I'll respond strongly, but then we're going to continue doing what we've doing, maybe, but a little less virtue signally, I guess.
although even that's not pared down all that much. But yeah, like these really feel like they could have been written for the 2019 election, just with a few minor changes here and there. Yeah, like you should see you should see the conservative platform being something Andrew Scheer would have run on. The liberal one really feels like a Justin Trudeau platform, except they move the economic stuff to the top instead of having it right at the bottom. But other than that, it could have easily been something that the past liberal government wrote, and I saw a few people saying that this was a platform that was literally written before Carney took over, and I don't think that's true. But what is, I think, something that comes through in this is the same people with the same worldview, verbal or written in verbal text and all that, wrote each of the platforms, and it comes through pretty strong that this is very much the same liberals, even if they changed up the leader on it. And that's a real missed opportunity for them, because the whole what US question is absolutely one of the top ones, and it's a significant ballot question, but there's also still a very strong time for a change sentiment in Canada that's out there too. The Conservatives are very much trying to push the framing onto that, but that is the Liberals' clear weakness in the election. Is they've had 10 years in government. Were very unpopular. They're kind of being saved by just catching the political wins at just the right moment, but it's fundamentally a country that does want a different government if there wasn't the blaring alarm sound going off right now, and anything that makes people think about that's going to be a problem.
I think there is, to his credit, some substantively different stuff in here. There's a focus on cutting red tape, of going back on some of the all of them are talking about cutting down on consultants and paring back government at some way. The focus on free trade, although some of that was talked about by Trudeau because it's been an ongoing issue, and we can come back to that. It's got Carney's signature stuff around infrastructure investment, although that's like in some ways a reframing of what Trudeau could have talked about at
in the
times.
2015 campaign, the will run deficits was we'll run a few years of $10 billion-ish deficits to do like important infrastructure investments, was kind of the frame there. Yeah. Now it's been 10 years and the deficits have only grown. The infrastructure didn't really show up as big a focus, but like, that part is not fundamentally different from what past Liberal campaigns have been.
I think where the Conservative platform fails is, as you highlight, it's still stuck in 2019. Like, it's a very Pierre Poilievre wants to fight the battle that Erin O'Toole didn't. Like, I think Erin O'Toole's kind of Conservatives could do a lot better here, because they wouldn't have that as much of that hanging question of like, how much do you sympathize with Donald Trump? And parts of this are stronger from that. And in speeches, he talks about standing up for Canada and he's adopting the stronger language. But, he had the controversy where people pointed out he'd made a promise in Quebec to end the woke. And then that didn't show up in his platform and English platform. And then they amended the Quebec section of their English platform to include the "we'll take woke out of public service and universities," and kind of just re-highlights this like cultural obsession that seems to define Pierre Poilievre, and an unwillingness to let it go. And maybe it's politically strategic, because if he does, the People's Party is there to take that up to 5% of the vote and really guarantee he can't win, just like Erin O'Toole suffered from.
I'm not even sure.
Or maybe he believes it.
Yeah, I don't even think it's all that strategic on it. It's you can convey the same fundamental message without using the word woke and get 95% of the political benefit of shoring that up without also getting everyone else to roll their eyes.
Yeah, like notably, his platform doesn't mention the World Economic Forum or WEF, which he has done in many speeches, even through the election. Like a lot of it did get toned down in some ways from that.
Yeah, except about the Century Initiative.
Yeah,
That
they
makes
mentioned
two
that.
appearances in there.
Notably, the Conservative platform, 30 pages and a lot of large pictures of Polyev filling it. So, not the lightest platform. That's the NDP's by far, but the Liberals put out, like, I think it was a 67-page, just like margin to margin text document. Which
the have both of them up here. The Conservative one definitely had much narrower margins. Theirs went to basically the edge of the page, where the Liberals have like kind of standard Word document margins on it.
The NDP didn't release a PDF.
No, which is also super annoying. Just give it to me in like a single searchable PDF where it's all there. Don't make me click on little buttons to like expand it out like the NDP's was that makes it impossible to search for anything.
The NDP do give a costing PDF, but yeah, that's it. The rest is these pop-ups that really don't work on mobile somehow.
Yeah, I found that same problem when I was going through their news releases. You often could not pull those up.
Like I do like
click here for more button wasn't working on mobile. So yeah, just like a basic fail on that part.
The Liberals did have they didn't have, and then they added and then they removed their PDF link. So you can still find their PDF by just Google searching it. But their platform is like web-based, but it has a search bar right at the top. And out of the three, it's probably the easiest to like navigate. Because the Conservative plan, there's the download the PDF, which works well. And then there's just like a list of announcements. Oh yeah, the Conservative plan doesn't actually mention notwithstanding clause, despite them having talked about that during the election.
Yeah, I did notice that too.
It's a weird kind of pivot, considering they talked about that last week.
But yeah, those are the overall like vibes of the platform. But kind of what stood out in terms of the actual concrete stuff in there for you? Like a lot of it was retread, but there's definitely some new things in there.
I mean, even before that, the costing was fascinating because it all seems magical. The Conservatives ate a lot of shit for theirs, probably deservedly so, because they've been critical of the Liberal government's deficits, and then they propose very big deficits as well, of 30 billion for 2 years, getting down to 23, and then 14 billion in their 28-29 year. The Liberals have a similar kind of challenge of deficits going into the future, although Mark Carney has talked about a path to balance in 3 or 4 years. Let me just pull up his numbers.
Well, the Carney ones are also a little questionable.
But, yeah, they're also looking at $30 billion deficits a year. I know one of the things that came up in the Conservative platform is some of their tax cuts they're promising will raise revenue. And I saw people posting that on Blue Sky, but I wasn't exactly sure.
So there's, looking through it right here. So you have revenue gains from the capital gains measures. So those ones are very focused on driving investment in Canada. I could see the argument for that. They're putting revenue gains in for additional homes built. Yeah, fair enough on that. That would generate economic activity. Beyond that,
billions of dollars a year. They're promising to make like $4 billion a year from just building extra homes. They're also promising a lot of revenue gain from repealing various climate actions. Basically, the Conservative climate plan, as far as I can tell, is stop doing anything in Canada and just make sure that other countries use our LNG instead of coal.
Yeah, that's very much it.
It doesn't even include nuclear.
Yeah, that's definitely odd. Because that's something they've talked about, like some Pierre Poilievre's talked about. That's something that's featured in several of the last Conservative platforms. I'm pretty sure they actually put out an announcement during the campaign on SMRs.
They talk about one and done for nuclear power stations. They want to approve the Rook 1 uranium mine in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, there's like a lot of room on that where they could have thrown it in on there.
Like the Conservative platform feels half-baked for considering they've been working towards an election for 18 months.
Yeah, like I said, I could honestly see the point of doing a very focused platform on this, but there's enough other stuff in here. It doesn't feel like it has that focus. There's enough on there where it just adds into it, confuses stuff on there. Hell, even just on like the format and stuff, if they'd started their thing like here's our like 6 main commitments or whatever, which I think they have. Yeah, just put like 6 commitments or 7, as I think the thing actually has in it, sections. These are the main things we're going to do, and then like fill in the details later. That could have actually worked, but that's just not how they organized it. On the economic stuff, it really feels like this is a section that is just so oil and gas focused. It's actually kind of ridiculous. Past Conservative platforms were definitely more well-rounded on this, which is, I almost feel like they've gone so hard on the carbon tax stuff and pushing back on the Trudeau era policies around oil and gas that they've kind of lost sight of everything else that goes into the economy. Critical resources gets 1 bullet point on it, and it's at the bottom of the page, which is wild. And yeah, I suppose they have a little bit on infrastructure on the next page, but it is just so oil and gas focused. It's really kind of bizarre compared to just where they have been in other times on there. So yeah, definite miss on that. On there. Yeah, on the revenue stuff, that was definitely rosy on there. And going so big on the deficits, I think was also a mistake, because it kind of blurred the contrast point with the Liberals, who, when they put in $130 billion of new spending, really allowed for that contrast point. And on, yeah, also the Liberal one's a little wild too, because almost all of their revenues and savings, other than 1 year's of tariff responses, is just dominated by government efficiency.
Yeah.
On there, which also feels a little hand wavy.
They both want to save a lot of money without like telling you what they're going to cut. They're just going to be more efficient, going to stop using consultants. That's going to save the Conservatives billions of dollars. But like the consultants generally do something. Like not always, I'll grant. And they usually cost more than in-house. But can't just magic them away. Can't magic that work away.
Well, I don't know. The government's added or grown the public sector by 40%, while also massively expanding the use of consultants. Like there's probably actually quite some room to fit some of that stuff for sure. But particularly if you're out of government, just making a wild guess on that's going to be something I wouldn't necessarily want to do. But yeah, on the Conservative platform, there are a couple tax things in there that caught my eye. One is a very dumb idea to require referendums to increase taxes. This is how you get like the crazy California financial troubles
I mean, it just
Not
means
a
you're
great
not
idea.
doing new taxes.
Yeah, I mean, for the government. I think Mike Harris probably did a similar thing. It basically just got repealed by the Nets government, who then went on to run the province for 15 years, and basically, as far as I can tell, bear no political price for getting rid of that. So yeah, that's silly. You can't bind a future government's hands, so whatever on that
It's
one.
like a balanced budget law.
Yeah. They do have a tax reform task force, which is nice. Good to see. Long overdue on that. So happy to see that. On the economy stuff, yeah, it was pretty oil and gas focused, but they did have a few other things that caught my eye. They want to keep all the supports for the auto sector, which is weirdly a lot of corporate welfare for a party that's supposed to be about not doing that.
In an era where the US is trying to steal back or consolidate all the auto manufacturing, if you want to have those jobs here, it's hard to justify cutting those supports at this point, even if they are massive. Yeah, so I get where they are on that. I did notice they want to launch a $44 billion lawsuit against Big Pharma to pay for addiction and recovery, which is ironically a thing the BC NDP have also done. So, everyone can agree across the spectrum. Let's sue Big Pharma and make them pay for societal problems.
Yeah. They also want to explore bringing container shipping to the Great Lakes, which is interesting. Like, yeah, because the implications of that are, I don't think the St. Lawrence Seaway is big enough to handle the modern large container ships. So that's a potential bottleneck, or would they be building a new port for mode changing on that off the Lakers and onto the ocean-going vessels? But container traffic is by far the most efficient way to ship stuff. So potential win, but opens up a whole new bag of questions
and a big fight with Quebec, possibly. There was a couple interesting labor things in here. On the immigration side, they said that labor market impact assessments for temporary foreign workers would require union pre-checks so that unions get consulted before TFWs are hired, which I thought was an interesting thing. I don't know how many unions are specifically calling for that, but it does seem like a blue-collar appeal. They also said they will not do anti-union bills like C-377 or 525 and no right-to-work laws. There's a couple we promise not to do things in here as well. There's a promise not to pass an anti-abortion ban as well.
or raise the OAS age.
Yeah. And I think they also promise to maintain pharmacare and dental as they stand. Yeah, preserve existing dental care coverage and honor existing deals on childcare and pharmacare specifically, which you can some read into negatively and some are like, oh, that's fine. So, it's interesting to see how it shifts in language from where they were talking during the campaign in many cases as well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that's, particularly the we want to are just kind of basic shield issue stuff on there. Also, stuff I noticed, they want to do a free trade bonus. So basically any increased tax revenue that comes from the economic growth of getting rid of internal trade barriers, that money would just get transferred to the provinces, which is an interesting incentive. Seems a little hard to calculate, but as a basic idea, not a terrible one to throw a little incentive in there, just those have been surprisingly stubborn. And they also want to get rid of the trade barriers on Canadian wine, beer, and spirits.
Who doesn't?
All the provinces.
The provinces, apparently.
They went to the Supreme Court to try and keep the right to not do that.
Yeah, so...
and I guess the only other thing I'm going to flag in here is one that got a fair bit of attention was the take out degree requirements where it's not like a real need for the job. Lawyers obviously will need a law degree sort of thing, but in the public service. But where there are unnecessary degree requirements, get rid of those, which seems like a great idea.
Yeah, it's something I've generally seen as an equity seeking, like a way to promote diversity and equity is to say, like, not everyone needs a post-secondary degree to get a job that doesn't actually need that, because you can develop experience in lots of different ways.
Or a social mobility thing.
Yeah, exactly.
As well.
That too. Yeah, I'm curious what the actual existing mandate is. I think it's probably just the public service has a lot of small c conservative managers who, like people being in office for things that don't require them to be in office for, and have that kind of, the manager we all hate. Not that they're conservative, it's just that they hate their employees.
Yeah, and something you've seen in a lot of hiring situations that has developed over the past several decades is the use of that getting put in there, not because it's a real job requirement, but just when you have a lot of applicants, it's a convenient way to do a initial early screen and call down the list on it. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's a bunch of them that are basically like, hey, we got a lot of job applicants for this. Let's just use this as a initial screening method.
The last substantive page of their platform before the Quebec section is their Canadian identity stuff, and it's got a lot of the stuff you would expect. A Free Speech Act to repeal the liberal censorship laws, mostly on, and they'll get news back on Meta, which Meta could do right now because they haven't been actually subject to the act. That has not been
because
yet.
they decided they were going to
preemptively
take news off. Yeah. It was a bad piece of legislation that was poorly thought out and poorly executed. Getting rid of that made just a lot of sense.
They are putting more money into the local journalism initiative, which is good to see, and some more money for Indigenous language media, so positives on that. At the same time, defunding the CBC and letting it become a Canadian-owned self-sufficient media organization that's not for profit and supported by listeners and donations, which, looking at the number of large non-profit media outlets out there, there's not many, and the largest is probably the Tyee. There's some for-profit media like Rebel that does well, but it's not the same as the CBC. They also want to restore in-person citizenship ceremonies and update the oath to add certain words. They're fine words, whatever. They don't say God, so I'm fine with them. They also want to restore Terry Fox and Vimy Ridge monuments, which I didn't realize anyone had taken either of those down. But okay. And then force universities to adhere to Section 2 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms on freedom of expression as a condition for federal funding, which is standard conservative stuff, as well as all of the following things like banning dismissal based solely on COVID vaccine status, because we're still fighting that that's a 2021 pledge, Scott, not a 2019 one.
I'm not even sure they put that in the 2021 platform.
I think it was a big challenge, and that's part of why people were concerned about Aaron O'Toole, because he was trying to walk tightropes around that. They're also opposing moves to mandatory digital ID, preventing the Bank of Canada from developing digital currency, which I guess... Oh no, they don't want a central digital currency. They're still fine with blockchain, I think. And then remove the CRA's home sale reporting requirement feels like super niche libertarian stuff. Is that something?
That was also in the in their housing section too. It's showed up twice in the platform. I can't quite figure out what the point of that is. Primary residences are already tax exempt on the sales, so why bother?
Someone powerful or important is mad about that they have to report the sale of their home to the CRA.
It's weird. I don't understand that one.
So, yeah, that's the Conservatives. Was there stuff that stood out in the Liberals for you? I mean, theirs was the most rounded, I felt. It had the most sections. It was the longest. You don't necessarily have to like it all, but a lot of it was, as we mentioned already, rehashes. It felt like the stuff they've talked about before.
Yeah, a lot of rehashes on there. Um, yeah, there were a few things that stood out on there. The some of the defense stuff. This is a rehash, modernizing the recruitment process, but a friend of mine is right now trying to join the reserves. You know, a 30-something person with an established career, and just like trying to talk to a recruiter has proven to be like a giant headache. You know, not having emails returned, can't even like schedule a phone call, have to go in person to talk to someone in 2025 on it. Like they're probably going to lose that potential recruit just because they've made it so hard even to initiate the process on it. So good on that, but it's ridiculous to see that, you know, in the decade and a half since I went through that, they've not improved it at all as far as I can tell, or it's still like a giant cumbersome process. So yeah, good on that. But you know, they've also had 10 years to do it and haven't done it yet. So like a lot of these, I read the policy and then I look at what the last 10 years have been like, and I just aren't going to really believe it until it actually gets implemented. But beyond that, in the sense that they want to buy Canadian-made airborne early warning and control aircraft, but as far as I know, there are no Canadian AWACS planes out there. So that's a whole can of worms on what that's going to be and how they would even do. Like, are we going to buy like some European radar system and try and strap it to the top of a Bombardier C-Series jet or something? And beyond that, this was not in their previous defense policy, but get self-propelled artillery systems, good. Ground-based air defense capabilities, long overdue. The military hasn't had that for 10 years, but also you haven't had it for 10 years. How have you not gotten this capability already? And then similar to the Conservatives, they want to expand the presence in the Arctic and include a network of deep water ports, but unlike the Conservative platform, they don't actually name any of the potential places. So on there's been a couple areas where the Conservatives go into just more detail on this stuff, where the Liberals keep it like super vague and high level. There's like been a general line of criticism that Carney's the guy with all the plans and the details, and Pierre's just slogans. But on a lot of the stuff, the Conservatives just have more details and more of a plan on it.
Scott, it doesn't sound like a plan when they say they will restore our diplomatic presence abroad by introducing a new full foreign policy. We're not telling you what it is right now, but we'll redevelop it because we haven't had one since 2005. This is wild. I missed this earlier. They are promising a foreign policy. They're not going to tell you what the foreign policy is.
Which they've put out like a bunch of various strategies and whatnot.
Well, the government has. Mark Carney Liberals haven't.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm all for that. You know, as far as Canadian foreign policy go, I would just like us to actually have one, and we kind of don't.
Hey, that's what he wants to have. They literally admit we haven't had any plan since 2005.
That's good. I do notice they've basically doubled down, changing gears a little bit on the guns. I noticed they basically doubled down on their previous announcement, and that session is chock full of misinformation about how the system actually works, from the automatic revoking of gun licenses from people convicted of violent offenses, already the law, as well as making it so the RCMP, not the gun industry, classifies firearms. That's also literally what already happens, except for all of the times the Liberals have gone in through order in council and just mucked around with it for political reasons. But the gun industry does not decide what classification a firearm is in Canada, and the fact that made it in the platform is just ridiculous.
Well, there's a similar section, or similar things that are already the law, where they promise to make it a criminal offense to intentionally and willfully obstruct access to any place of worship, school, or community center, and to willfully intimidate or threaten those attending services at those locations. The Conservatives also say they want tougher sentences for religious property mischief, which is an existing crime. In the criminal code, there is a very weird, obscure section that the Liberals, during their initial criminal code repeal cleanup act, which was an early one that covered things like the blasphemy law and fake witchcraft and dueling. They were also going to repeal this section 176, which is obstructing or violence to obstructing or violence to or arrest of officiating clergymen. They ended up changing the language a bit in the law, but because religious groups got upset that they threatened to pull this out, a law that no one had been charged with for years, but it is a convictable offense to obstruct or prevent people from officiating or celebrating a religious or spiritual service. And it's also a separate offense to disturb or interrupt a religious worship. I did actually find a case, because I was interested in this for work, where I think it went to the Supreme Court, or at least the Court of Appeal in Nova Scotia. There were some like renegade Catholics in Nova Scotia who didn't like the change to the Vatican's approach to communion. They were trying to make it more efficient so you didn't need to kneel to take it when you're at the front of the line. And they're like, no, we demand to kneel. And then they got charged with disturbing a religious worship. Anyway, these crimes exist, and they sound a lot like intimidating those attending services. That would be a disruption, as well as obstructing it. The schools and community centers bit, it would be additional to this. So, okay, maybe there's a little bit new in there, but
yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like we've seen quite a few targeting of particularly Jewish community centers and schools,
and Sikh and Muslim ones as well.
And a half. Like there's definite room to improve things on the protection of those.
But a lot of that can be done through better enforcement of existing laws a lot of the time. This is what often becomes the challenge, rather than the challenge with new laws is you can often make it a little overbroad or get used when, like, if you were saying you can't obstruct access to a school, does a strike obstruct access to a school? This came up when BC passed similar laws to this around anti-COVID protests. So they're questions that aren't really answered and just kind of appear in the platforms. Yeah, what else with the Liberals before we move on? I'm conscious of time.
On the crime stuff, they want to make it harder for people charged with violent car theft for a criminal organization, home invasion, and certain human trafficking and smuggling offenses to have a reverse onus. Seems like a weird thing to just focus on those rather than a bunch of other violent crimes on there, and just put in a reverse onus for anyone with like a lengthy violent criminal record, which would just cover off a lot of the cases of the prolific offenders that are like a significant portion of the source of the crimes out there. Seems a big miss on that one. Similarly, they also want to direct courts to primarily consider denunciation and deterrencing when sentencing repeat car thieves or home invasions, but like once again, weird to single out those two crimes as if all the other violent crimes and whatnot shouldn't also have that.
Courts are going to take real great pleasure in getting sentencing directives from the government. They get some, I guess.
They should. Like this is very clearly where the this is very clearly where, like, in a democracy, it's the purview of the parliament to craft the laws and set what the overall goals of the system are and what should be used when judges are interpreting the law. So, like, yeah, very clearly Parliament's job to set that, not the courts.
Within the bounds of the Constitution and the Charter.
Yeah, and courts have been very broad in interpreting that, and like a little pushback from Parliament's, overdue on that.
Anything else in the crime stand out?
That was mostly it under the crime section.
I noticed in the health section they want to fund IVF for a single cycle for everyone. That's something some provinces have done. I believe BC has moved that direction, as well as Manitoba. But making that national would be great for everyone struggling to become parents, but who want to.
Yeah. I mean, good on a few different levels. I mean, probably pays for itself over the long run just from the additional citizens that then become contributing members to society on it. Also, in birth rates, way below replacement. Anything that helps get that up to help rebalance the demographics of the country, so it's no longer population age distribution is getting as skewed towards the elderly, would be a big benefit on that. Yeah, so great idea there. Really behind that. On the international front, interesting thing tucked in the support for Ukraine was the last clause of that section was, if needed, build on our peacekeeping heritage and step up to guarantee Ukrainian security. So like opening up the door for a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine, which is big and probably something that should get its own important discussion and not just tacked in on the end of a bullet point buried in the middle of the platform.
Of course, a peacekeeping mission in the truest sense would have to be authorized by the UN Security Council, which seems unlikely given the membership of that council.
Yeah, you just have to have a peace to keep.
Yeah. You can't go into a hot war and make it peace.
Yeah, also considering the Russians' disregard for the peace agreements and ceasefires and all that, I would not put a lot of trust in that peacekeeping remains peaceful for a long period of time. And I think post-war, there's definitely a spot for the West to step up and help maintain Ukraine's security, but we should go into it with open eyes of just what that means.
Notably, neither the Liberals nor Conservatives mention Israel at all in their platforms or anything they wanted. They just don't want to talk about that. The Conservatives do say they will support Ukraine's war effort by sending $22 billion in frozen Russian assets to them. And then, recognize sovereignty of Ukraine's territory. Which is a better answer than he gave during the debate.
Yeah, no argument there.
Let's touch on the NDP quickly.
Just a couple other quick things to mention on the Liberal platform. The other thing that caught my eye, which definitely felt like a very Trudeau-era thing, is they want to expand the court challenges program on there, which honestly not a fan of. If the government thinks something is unconstitutional, they should just change the law rather than paying activists to try and get the court to make a decision they don't want to take responsibility for.
The government doesn't always know. Speaking as an activist who dislikes a lot of things, government doesn't always know what it's doing that's unconstitutional, and some of these things funded by a court challenge, I assume, take on provincial and municipal issues as well. So one of the things that comes up is unconstitutional policies like prayer in municipalities, something I work closely on. Local governments don't know the current law, and it takes activists to actually stand up and challenge it. And individuals don't often have the capacity to hire lawyers, and I've been privileged to work with some excellent pro bono lawyers, but the program does do some good for the country, and we don't have to like every one of the results, but without that, the status quo is so much stronger, and the status quo in many cases is quite unjust. So I like it.
I don't know, there's something perverse about the government paying people to sue themselves on it.
The European Union pays an environmental and social justice activist groups to lobby them to counterbalance corporate influence.
Doesn't necessarily, just because the European Union does, it doesn't mean it's a good idea or good use of public resources.
Well, if we don't have these underfunded activists doing it. It's going to be the well-funded corporate and institutional status quo. So in terms of challenging systemic injustice, I am a big fan of this kind of approach.
Well, they can always just make the changes themselves. Like, there is a democratic process for that sort of thing.
It took how many years before medical assistance in dying was legalized, even though 80% of people supported it? And it took a court challenge. Our democratic system don't work great, Scott. But yeah, let's continue on. Anything else before we...
That's about it for the Liberal platform.
The NDP platform, as mentioned, structurally annoys both of us. It's hard to search through. A lot of it is stuff they've already talked about. There is some new stuff they haven't talked as much about, like on the funding side. They have a wealth tax in here, which they talked about before the election, but I hadn't heard Singh do a specific announcement on that. There's a commitment to the NATO defense targets spending.
Which, incidentally, despite the fact that they're coming to a pretty significant ramp up in there, nowhere in their costing document do they even mention defense once, which it would amount to one of the larger platform commitments in there. So that's a little sketchy on the whole costing of it. And on the wealth tax, their numbers are pretty rosy on that. When other countries have tried this, the revenues that it raises never live up to the expectation, because the people who will be subject to that will usually move their tax residence and often leave the country. So you see an exodus of high net worth individuals, and it ultimately ends up just being counterproductive, raises barely any money, and is pretty economically distorting and a drag on the economy.
The numbers they use are pulled from the Parliamentary Budget Office, who, you can argue with them, but they are much better at these kind of projections than I am. So, the $22 billion a year that it estimates they can make from that is straight from the PBO. I should put the link to the PBO's work that, because most of the parties have had the ability to ask the PBO, and the Conservatives have a bunch of questions in there, as do the Liberals and the NDP and the Bloc. I don't know if the Liberals have many in there. I see the NDP and Conservatives, but a lot of platform promises have gotten costed out by them. This used to be a big thing, but no one pays attention to it anymore.
Yeah, it seems like it fell off in the last election, since the last election or so.
We just vote on vibes now. Oh, here's the Liberal ones.
Although I'm sure in Carney's case, he was like crunching the numbers, on the bus or whatever, for fun.
So yeah, the NDP have in here some infrastructure spending, including the Building Canada Fund, which confused us for a while before we started the show, because it says $10 billion per year, but then it's only costed at $400 million per year. And if you Google, the NDP have never talked about the Building Canada Fund since 2015. And it was a thing that existed in 2014 that the federal government worked with some provinces, mostly BC, I think, to invest in infrastructure. But I think this is just part of their broader infrastructure investments.
So they basically are missing like 96% of the cost of that?
I don't know if they plan to split it, or if it's like the operating cost is just $400 million, but because it's a capital investment, they're not counting it, or if this is just how much they're topping it up. I don't know. It does seem...
It's weird, but it's one thing if it's a capital investment that's going on, that is an asset the government is going to own, but if they're just going to be contributing to a provincial project where the ownership is, with the province or municipality, you shouldn't really be counting that on the government's asset books at that point.
Yeah. So, I don't know. What I found weird with the NDP platform was the stuff that was missing. There wasn't any mention of LGBTQ rights. There wasn't any mention of reproductive health care, stuff that the Liberals included because they always include it. And I would have expected the NDP to include it because they always include it, but they just didn't bring it into this It's not even called
the
a
whole
platform,
thing's-
to be fair. It's called their commitments.
Yeah, the whole thing is like surprisingly bare bones. It's really weird on it.
Disappointed. I'll say because we're running up on the hour, the Greens did have a very substantive platform, but it's the kind of like collection of policy things that the members have voted on and sent to be their platform. So you get contradictory things like they will nationalize oil companies that try to leave the country, or at least their assets, but then they will also divest the government from oil and gas investments. So
wildly contradictory on that.
I mean, as long as they
makes no sense.
nationalize the thing and then to sell it off to Canadian companies, it could still it felt contradictory to me. The Bloc also has a platform, but we won't talk about that because I don't speak enough French to be confident about it. Other than they want to pay the Governor General $1, I think that's funny.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. On the Greens, I gave it a very quick skim before recording, but didn't dive into it too much. On there, yeah, a lot of it is very much just what you'd expect from the Greens. The one thing that did kind of stand out to me a bit is their defense section is, well, still significantly lacking where it should be. Was far more, we should actually just invest in a bunch of capabilities and stuff on there, which is a real sign of the times, because that's the most pro-military spending I've ever seen a Green platform by a huge margin.
Yeah, they had a big policy announcement about that near the start of the campaign. I should note the Green platform's 124 pages. It does have kind of a large left margin, but even at half that, it's still the largest platform significantly. Because they're the Greens. They just have lots of ideas that may never come to pass. So
so that's kind of the run of the platforms. I mentioned at the start that kind of the thing I was looking for was a big, like, how do we do a rapid buildup of economic and hard power in the country? None of those really answered it. There were definitely a few gaps in what was in the platform. Things that would have made a lot of sense. A dedicated forward intelligence service, just not mentioned, would be a very good idea, particularly right now, and particularly as speculation about the future membership of the Five Eyes is in discussion and has been. Also, economic productivity. Barely a mention, not anywhere in the Conservative platform. The Liberals, one sentence mentioning that it would be good to have more of it, and then all the other mentions are just about AI. So not exactly a strong showing there. The NDP just didn't even touch it. In fact, the NDP platform is pretty meh on the economy in general and proposes a bunch of things that would be a net trade on the economy. And yeah, overall, just this will, both in the platforms and in the campaign generally, there's just been a very much a missed opportunity to really reflect the moment. There was a little bit on vibes, but on a shit, we're actually in a bit of trouble right now. How do we get out of it?
Yeah,
it just didn't really have anything, or it was things like, the government had talked about, hitting like 1.76% sometime in the next decade. We'll maybe, get that last little bit up to 2, so we'll do like a little more on it, but nobody's like fundamentally rethinking what the Canadian defense architecture is, what the broader security architecture is, what the broader economic architecture is. There's just none of the shit. We got to do big things quickly on this, and not just big things that are focused very much on addressing the pressing problem on there. Not a new social program. It's a big thing. Doesn't speak to the moment. It's not on target.
Well, we have stories out of the US that are just not, like, all of it seems predicated on the US returning to normal soon, but it might not. And we have stories of Canadians people being disappeared from the States. There's nothing addressing, like I've said before, the Safe Third Country Agreement. There's nothing addressing the chance we may be likely going into recession if all of this tariffs doesn't just go away in a few months. Like, there's a lot of big uncertainty and threats that are peppered over with some language at times from each of the parties, but it's
also
our relationship is fundamentally changed.
Yeah, it's the same problem that the government had from 2020 to 2024. Just not understanding that, even if things go back to normal in 4 years, there's still a risk that, you're one election away from things going off the rails. And there needs to be a recognition of that. That's just not there.
None of the parties have it.
So yeah, like that's just where I think the overall campaigns felt falling down. Other than like the little bits here and there, like the first week in particular, was focused on that. But
they were also announcing tax cuts. They're like, we all need to cut middle class taxes. That was it's like, what are we doing?
I'm saying that's the peak of the vibes on that. Was the first week, and it fell by the wayside. And it's really kind of returned to just like any old election campaign. The Liberal campaign's been like weirdly, after a strong start, kind of weirdly quiet in the lead up to the debate, and afterwards, like the momentum they had's kind of fallen by the wayside. They've got a lot of runway, but the polls have tightened a bit on there, and all of it just...
Poilievre's last few announcements were like scrapping the EV car mandate and scrapping plastic straw bans, which...
I mean, I'm actually for getting plastic straws back. The paper ones are terrible.
Sure, but it doesn't meet the moment.
It doesn't meet the moment, yeah. On there, like, I get the conservatives, just with where they are better off fighting the change election narrative than that, but they also would have had less of a gap to close if they'd had a more meet to the moment thing too. I don't know, all of it's just disappointing. And like, yeah, I mentioned off the top of the show, like I was really debating right up till I voted kind of what the how I was going to vote, and the thing that was pulling back and forth is after 10 kind of unimpressive years, a lot of mistakes the government has made, there really is, I think, a very strong case that there ought to be some political accountability from the electorate on this, and that, boy, do the Liberals ever deserve to lose the election after their recent track record of governing. But also, yeah, the guy running it's probably the best person in a crisis to handle things, and I don't know.
And the Conservatives don't deserve to win based on this kind of approach either. And like we won't get into it because we should stop so that Jesse's not editing all the time, but like we got a series of stories in the last couple of days of like Doug Ford sending a letter of like, I want to make sure whoever's elected sticks to our commitments to childcare because the government hasn't been following through as much. And like a story out of Nova Scotia where Tim Houston didn't meet with Poilievre, and it's apparently been like a rocky few months of relationship there, and instead...
Not just didn't meet, yeah. Apparently the Poilievre team started burning the bridges on that one. Yeah, there's definitely some... The going scorched earth on your
own side.
On your own side, on the people who are actually in government and have like, who clearly have effective political machines that have been stood up, just seems wild.
The only worse strategy is the Greens suing the debate commission for their own missteps.
If it was possible for everyone to lose this election, I would kind of be happy with that.
Hey, but there is a chance every leader loses their seat. Carney will probably win.
I can't imagine Carney losing his seat.
We saw a few stories that Poilievre is redirecting resources to Carleton, which he denies. Some of those are allegedly coming from the Ontario PCs, which just is further funny. Jagmeet Singh might lose. Elizabeth May might finally lose. Jonathan Pedno stands no chance. So
never did.
We could see a lot of leadership changes in the next few months, except for the Liberals, most likely.
Oh, the NDP definitely needed to change their leader and have for a while.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Prediction wise, yeah, it's probably the Liberals are probably going to win this. Kind of wish they wouldn't, but also like it's not like anyone else has presented a good case for why they should be running the country. This is just like being just a disappointing election all around, and but then again, that's kind of how I felt in a lot of the last election. I can't remember the last election I was like genuinely excited for.
It's the most Canadian election to expect the Liberals to win and to be disappointed by it. And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.